One Thanksgiving, my family set my dinner on a paper plate out on the porch because I wasn't clean enough to eat inside. The words landed harder than the cold. I stood on the porch holding a flimsy paper plate that bent beneath slices of turkey, mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce while warm, light spilled through the dining room windows behind me. Inside, I could hear forks scraping china, laughter bouncing off the walls, football commentators shouting from the television. Every sound reminded me that I had been deliberately moved outside, as if I carried something contagious instead of grease under my fingernails from another 12-hour shift. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My father shrugged like it was common sense. My older sister quietly shut the front door before the November wind could carry their conversation out to me. "You're filthy," my aunt had said with a wrinkle of her nose. "You can eat after you clean yourself up." There was no shower waiting for me. They knew I'd driven 3 hours straight from the garage where I'd spent the holiday repairing emergency service trucks because everyone else wanted the day off. I came directly to dinner because they insisted family came first. Apparently that only applied when I looked the part. I sat on the porch steps for a minute, staring at the paper plate balanced on my knees. The cardboard softened beneath the gravy. My hands were stained with oil that no soap could completely erase anymore, but they were clean. Cleaner, I realized, than the people sitting 20 feet away pretending humiliation was tradition. When the wind picked up, I carried my dinner to my car. The heater rattled as it fought the cold. I ate in silence, watching condensation blur the glowing windows of the house where everyone I had ever tried to impress was comfortably finishing dessert. No one came outside. No one texted. No one wondered why my headlights disappeared before the pie was served. I folded the empty paper plate in half, dropped it into a gas station trash can on my way home, and made a decision so quietly that even I barely noticed it. I would never argue. I would never demand an apology. I would simply disappear from their lives so completely that one day they'd have to wonder whether throwing me onto that porch had cost them far more than a Thanksgiving dinner. I was the youngest son, the one everyone assumed would always need help, even after I stopped asking for it, while my brother wore suits and collected promotions, and my sister filled the walls with framed degrees. I rebuilt engines for a living. My work left my hands rough, my boots stained, and my clothes carrying the scent of diesel no matter how carefully I washed them. To my family, that smell became my identity. They loved introducing everyone else's accomplishments. Mine was usually followed by an awkward smile and a quick change of subject. At birthdays, I was asked to move heavy furniture before anyone asked how I was doing. During holidays, I fixed broken appliances, shoveled snow, and repaired cars in the driveway while everyone else stayed warm inside. They praised my reliability, but never my worth. Somewhere along the way, I became useful instead of important. For years, I convinced myself that loyalty meant accepting the smallest chair at every table. I laughed at jokes that quietly mocked my career. I ignored the comments about my clothes, my truck, my apartment, and the fact that I never looked successful. Every slight came wrapped in a smile, making it easy for everyone else to pretend it wasn't an insult. The Thanksgiving dinner on the porch wasn't the beginning of their disrespect. It was simply the first time they stopped hiding it. Driving home that night, I realized something uncomfortable. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a place in a family that only valued appearances. They measured success by titles, neighborhoods, and polished shoes. They never noticed the quiet things. Showing up, keeping promises, working until sunrise so someone else's life could keep moving. So I stopped trying to convince them they had misjudged me. Some people spend years planning revenge. I spent mine becoming impossible to overlook. After that Thanksgiving, I didn't cut my family off overnight. I simply stopped chasing invitations that were never truly meant for me. They noticed my absence only when something needed fixing. My father would leave short voicemails, asking if I could repair the furnace before winter. My sister would call when her car refused to start. My brother only reached out when he wanted advice on buying used equipment for a rental property, speaking to me with the same careful politeness people reserve for strangers. Not once did anyone ask how I had been. At birthdays, my chair quietly disappeared from the table because no one expected me to come anymore. If I did stop by, conversations paused for half a second before picking up exactly where they had left off. My relatives smiled without warmth, their eyes drifting over my faded work jacket before settling on someone dressed better. My aunt still found little ways to remind everyone where she thought I belonged. "He's always busy working," she'd say with a sympathetic sigh that sounded more like judgment Some people just aren't meant for bigger things." No one corrected her. What surprised me wasn't the cruelty. It was how ordinary it had become. The silence between their comments carried more weight than the words themselves. Every lowered glance, every forced smile, every conversation redirected the moment I spoke confirmed the same quiet message. I was welcome only when I was useful, so I answered fewer calls. I declined more invitations. I let birthdays pass with nothing more than a text. Slowly, they adjusted to life without me, convinced I had faded into exactly the future they had always imagined, a mechanic working long hours, barely getting by, forgotten outside the walls of that comfortable family home. I never tried to change their minds. Sometimes the strongest move is allowing people to believe the story that will hurt them the most when they finally discover the truth. The turning point didn't come with an argument or a dramatic goodbye. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, when I was closing up the garage after another 12-hour shift. A regular customer handed me the keys to an old delivery truck. I'd kept running for nearly a decade. Before leaving, he looked around the shop and said, "You ever think about owning a place like this instead of making someone else rich?" He drove away before I answered, but the question stayed with me. That night, I opened a notebook instead of the television. I listed every skill I had, every customer who trusted me, and every dollar I had quietly saved while everyone assumed I was barely surviving. The numbers surprised even me. For years, I had mistaken endurance for progress. The next morning, I gave my notice. Within 6 months, I leased a neglected warehouse on the edge of town. I painted the walls myself, repaired every lift with used parts, and spent weekends rebuilding equipment most people would have thrown away. There were nights when I slept on a folding cot in the office, because I couldn't afford both a motel and payroll. Business came slowly at first. Then word spread. Fleet companies appreciated that I answered the phone before sunrise. Independent truckers remembered that I charged fairly and finished when I promised. One contract became 3. 3 became 10. I hired another mechanic, then 2 more, and before long, the waiting list was longer than the workdays available. The remarkable part wasn't the money. It was the peace. No one in my family knew where I was or what I had built. And for the first time in my life, their opinion had no influence over my mornings. I wasn't working to prove them wrong anymore. I was building a life that no longer needed their approval. Only later would I realize that disappearing, without a word, had become the most convincing answer I could have given. Success taught me something my family never had. Money attracts attention. Structure protects it. As the business grew, I resisted every temptation to celebrate too loudly. I hired an experienced accountant before I bought a nicer truck. I retained a business attorney before signing larger service contracts. Every agreement was reviewed twice. Every invoice documented. Every expansion planned months in advance instead of rushed for appearances. The garage became a company. The company became a reputation. When competitors struggled to keep mechanics, I offered fair wages, paid training, and predictable schedules. People stayed. Customers noticed. Fleet managers recommended us to other companies because they knew I valued reliability more than flashy promises. I also made one deeply personal decision. I changed my phone number, moved into a modest house under a quiet neighborhood's radar, and kept my home address separate from the business. My social media disappeared. Interviews were politely declined. Even the company website focused on the team instead of me. It wasn't about hiding. It was about choosing who had access to my life. Every holiday, while I knew my family was gathering without me, I scheduled bonuses for employees working through the season. We shared meals in the break room on paper plates by choice, laughing over stories from the shop. The memory never left me, but it stopped hurting. It became a reminder of the kind of table I wanted to build. 5 years passed without a single confrontation. No angry letters, no triumphant messages, no speeches about how wrong they had been. I simply became someone they could no longer describe. And because they believed I had failed, none of them ever thought to look for me until my brother happened to recognize the company logo on a service truck parked outside one of his rental properties. That was the first crack in the story they had spent years telling themselves. I didn't know my brother had been looking for me until he walked through the service bay one rainy afternoon. I recognized him immediately. He recognized me a second later. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Air compressors hummed in the background. Mechanics laughed over a stubborn bolt, and rain tapped softly against the metal roof. He looked past me at the rows of service trucks bearing my company's name, then through the glass wall into the office where dispatchers coordinated work across 3 counties. "This is yours?" he asked quietly. I nodded. There was nothing else to explain. He spent less than 10 minutes there. Before leaving, he glanced at the employee photo wall, the awards from local business associations, and the framed picture of our team sharing Thanksgiving dinner around a long table inside the shop. Everyone had a real plate. After he drove away, I returned to work. An hour later, my phone, an old number used only for business, began vibrating across my desk. One missed call, then another, then 10. By the end of the hour, there were 102 missed calls and messages from parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. Later, my brother admitted what happened. The family group chat had exploded after he sent a single photo of me standing beneath the company sign with a simple caption, "He's doing better than all of us put together." The conversation stopped almost immediately. No one knew what to say. Then the calls began. I looked at the screen for a long moment before placing the phone face down on my desk. Outside, another customer pulled into the lot. I picked up my clipboard, walked out to greet them, and let the ringing continue behind me. Some apologies arrive years too late. Silence is sometimes the only answer they deserve. I listened to the voicemails over the next few days, not because I was searching for closure, but because I wanted to hear what 5 years of silence sounded like when it finally echoed back. My mother cried through most of hers. My father cleared his throat so many times that he barely finished a sentence. My aunt, who had once decided I belonged on the porch, suddenly insisted the family had made mistakes and wanted a fresh start. No one mentioned the paper plate. They didn't have to. It was sitting quietly between every word they spoke. The news spread through the extended family faster than I expected. Relatives who had never returned my calls were suddenly telling everyone how proud they had always been of me. The same people who once introduced me as the mechanic now referred to me as a successful business owner, as though changing the title could rewrite the years that came before it. Reputation, I realized, is remarkably flexible. Character isn't. I never answered with anger. I didn't post my story online or embarrass anyone publicly. I simply kept the same boundary I had built brick by brick over 5 years. Some calls remained unanswered. Some messages received a polite, brief reply. A few received nothing at all. The greatest consequence wasn't that my family lost access to my success. It was that they finally understood they had lost access to me. Respect cannot be demanded after years of neglect. Trust cannot be rebuilt with a single apology. Both are earned slowly, then lost all at once. If there's anything worth remembering from my story, it's this. The people who underestimate you often believe they'll have unlimited chances to make things right. They don't. Sometimes the quietest person to leave the table is the one whose absence is felt forever. A year has passed since my brother walked into my garage. The phone doesn't ring as often anymore. People eventually accept the boundaries they once believed they could ignore. I've had coffee with my brother a few times. He never defended what happened that Thanksgiving, and I respected him more for that than for any apology he could have offered. He admitted he had spent years believing the version of me everyone else described instead of the one standing right beside him. That honesty was a beginning, not a repair, but a beginning. The rest of my family remains at a distance, not because I hate them, because peace is expensive and I already paid for it. The warehouse that once echoed with empty walls is now full of skilled mechanics teaching apprentices who remind me of myself years ago. Hardworking, overlooked, convinced that their value depends on someone else's opinion. I make sure they know better. Every holiday, we close the shop early, set a long table in the service bay, and everyone eats together before heading home. No one is asked where they belong. No one earns a seat. They already have one. Sometimes late in the evening, I still think about that paper plate on the porch. For years, I believed it represented rejection. Now I see it differently. It was a doorway. If they had welcomed me inside that night, I might have spent the rest of my life begging for scraps of respect. Being pushed outside forced me to build a place where respect was the foundation, instead of the reward. People often imagine revenge as something loud, a courtroom victory, a public confession, or a dramatic confrontation. They rarely recognize the quiet version. It's waking up in a life no longer controlled by the people who once made you feel small. It's realizing that forgiveness and access are not the same thing. And it's understanding that the best seat at the table is the one you build. Yourself, where no one can ever hand you another paper plate.